In the German state of Lower Saxony, a mysterious phenomenon lives on throughout the countryside. These mysterious relics of history, known as the Rundlinge, are small circular villages dating back hundreds of years. And though their numbers have been declining, through the tenacity of their inhabitants, they have managed to survive the forces of modernization to this day, and their lengthy history must not be forgotten. While these villages once existed in far greater density, through the times they have predominantly found their home in the small region of Wendland. But where did these strange settlements come from? It's harder to answer than you might think, as no records concerning their founding still exist, and even their ethnic origins have been long debated. The common consensus of recent years is that they were all founded at roughly the same time in the 12th century, as a way to make use of boggy land previously uncultivated due to its sandy soil and susceptibility to flooding. This theory came about by the research of Wolfgang Maybayer. He posits that it was a form of property division as part of Henry the Lion's colonization efforts in the Wendish Crusade, a military campaign fought largely by Saxon Germans. It was impelled by Pope Eugenius III in order to convert the pagan Slavic tribes known as Wends, and as a means to expand borders in Scandinavia and northern Germany. Evidence of this comes mainly from the large number of Rundlinge that can be found along the very same strip of land that the Wendish Crusade took place. Most Rundlinge were built less than 1,000 meters from each other, in order to make use of as much of the newly colonized land as possible, and they would generally be situated close both to water and to dry land more suitable for cultivation. Initially, there were only a handful of farmsteads, constructed around an open village green that was owned by the community as a whole, rather than by any one specific farmer. The leading farmer did, however, have a slightly better farmstead than the rest, and would often own more land outside the village. As for their shape, while the iconic image of a Rundling is circular, a fair amount also possess something more akin to the shape of a horseshoe, which is likely the earliest form of Rundling. But the design itself was not necessarily a new one, as it may have been based on settlements sharing the same shape dating back as far as the 7th century. The shape would not only maximize agricultural output by providing easier access to fertile land, but also encourage cooperation within the community. This also explains the ethnic origins of the Rundlinge, as it shows that they were not of Slavic origin, as it was speculated some years ago. They are, however, still closely associated with Slavic farm settlers, specifically the ethnic group of Wends, for whom the Rundlinge would serve as accommodation. Whether these settlers came willingly or as a result of conquest and forced settlement remains unclear, though most evidence points to it being a peaceful process, and more likely Germans and Slavs would have lived together in harmony. This did unfortunately lead to the Slavic language and ethnic identity disappearing over time, as their culture would slowly assimilate into German society. Yet they did leave a permanent mark on the Rundlinge, as many of the villagers used the Slavic language of Wendish for their names. The fully circular shape would not come about until long after the 12th century. No earlier than the 15th century would they come to look as they do today, at a time when population density was growing. Thus there grew a need for additional farmsteads, each plot requiring personal woodland for the farmer to use for numerous purposes. Because of this increase in buildings, eventually only a single path would allow entry into the village, thus shaping the round design of today. This design was sometimes altered in order to accommodate a path leading to a local church or mill, which in later years may have been widened to allow for the passage of vehicles, which is why some of these roads still exist today. This absence of a church within the Rundling villages themselves is an aspect that sets them apart from other European villages. While there are churches in the vicinity of these settlements, they are never located within the actual Rundling. One possibility is that the villages were constructed too close to the water table, with too little depth for any graveyard. It is also likely that the villages were simply too small to maintain a church, so a single church served multiple separate villages in the area. It is not only churches that are absent within them, however. Among the many Rundlinge, there are no examples of schools, shops, taverns, or trade outlets located in any of them. The Rundlinge were almost entirely self-sufficient communities, where the farmers produced their own food, clothing and other necessities, rendering amenities like shops and tradespeople unnecessary. While there is a great deal of history concerning the shape of the Rundlinge as a whole, the farmhouses themselves have stories to tell of their own. Their design can be found even in separate locations from the villages, as far as parts of eastern Netherlands. This is known as the Low German Hall House. It served as an all-in-one building, spacious enough not only for the farmer and his family, but also for his animals and hayloft. Typically, the front of the hall house faced the village green, where the animals would be kept, while the farmer resided at the back, facing his garden or small holding. The main open fire was placed in the middle, with the smoke escaping through small openings in the front facade. As with many medieval buildings, the infill between the timber was originally made from wattle and daub, and covered with lime mixture, but in some cases this was eventually replaced with brickwork. But there is not only one but 3 variants of the hall house, distinguished by the number of pillars that support the roof. This depended largely on the resources of the local area, determining the size of the farms and houses. But the 4-pole house, for instance, was also built with the purpose of allowing easy passage for carts and wagons, with a large hallway in the middle. This way, it was also easy to store goods, or display them as wares for sale. This also happens to be the most common form of hall house, sometimes also referred to as middle floor house. Unfortunately, we cannot know for certain what the original houses from the 12th century may have looked like, as the 10 earliest designs still standing are only from the 17th century, the very oldest being built in 1611. Interestingly, the majority of hall houses that have survived can be found chiefly in Wendland, and quite rarely in other parts of the country. Wendland is, in many ways, relatively isolated from the rest of Germany, and due to the lack of urbanization in this area through the years, rural architecture was allowed to endure far longer. And due to the limited regional resources, farmers would often need to simply make do and mend, rather than demolish old houses and build new ones. Wendland has struggled for decades with lack of infrastructure and employment opportunities due to the shrinking population. In fact, one of its most well-known facts today is its fight against deposit of radioactive waste in Gorleben, a location chosen precisely because of the region's low population density. Still, the Rundlinge themselves were actually depicted in maps of other regions than Wendland as recently as the 19th century, where they are much rarer today. In the late 19th century, Germany experienced a period of greater economic prosperity, and while Wendland itself did not become particularly wealthy, it did still benefit to some extent. Farmers were able to enhance the insulation of their houses, and would sometimes adorn the front facades with decorations, reflecting the pride of their owners. As Wendland rested right on the border of East and West Germany, the division came with both positives and negatives. On one hand, the border created a physical barrier that made it difficult for people to move in and out of the area, hindering economic development. On the positive side, the rural Rundling villagers were not affected negatively by industry or motorways, which allowed them to retain their traditional structure. But once East and West were again united, there came a new era for Wendland. New opportunities came for tourism, and the traditional architecture of the region became more widely known and appreciated. Its population still remains largely poor and relatively sparse, yet it has also become known for its environmental and cultural activities, with a thriving art scene, traditional crafts, and numerous festivals and events celebrating the region's heritage. The Association of Rundlinge was founded to promote the preservation of the Rundling villages. Through various activities such as guided tours, workshops, and publications, the association aims to raise awareness and appreciation for the cultural value of the Rundling villages, with the goal of active life continuing within them. They have also collaborated with local authorities and property owners to find ways to protect and maintain the old hall houses and other historic buildings. Thanks to their efforts, some of the Rundling villages have been designated as heritage sites and are now protected by law. But as younger generations often prefer modern housing and lifestyles, it is no troubleless pursuit. Many of these historic buildings were set to be demolished, and realizing the unique historical value of these villages, the early pioneers of the Rundlinge Association played a significant role in saving them. With the support of Germany's Monument Preservation Foundation, they were able to find alternative uses for the structures. Their efforts were fruitful, as some 2,000 half-timbered farmhouses in rural Wendland are now protected by the state. The pioneers also encouraged universities to conduct proper research of the phenomenon, leading to many discoveries of their history. The association would go on to organize various events, exhibitions, publications, and media coverage in order to promote the Rundlinge and their hall houses, and their work is set to continue many years forward. It's challenging to say just how many Rundlinge still exist today, as multiple have become part of larger settlements, or changed so greatly over time as to become hardly recognizable. It is estimated that there were originally around 1,000 such villages created in the 12th and 13th centuries, and based on enclosure maps from the early 19th century, only 204 of them would have survived since then. Sadly, many of these villages also experienced catastrophic fires, and had at one point or another been fully or partially rebuilt, not always in the circular structure of a traditional Rundling. In 2013, the Rundlinge Association conducted a comprehensive assessment of these 204 villages. However, only 95 of them were deemed recognizable to the untrained eye, as many modern houses have been added to them over the last century. And so the association aims to protect these 95 remaining villages. In spite of their long history, many of these houses are still in use for farming, and some have even been transformed into museums to showcase the traditional way of life. Multiple villages also offer unique experiences, like wedding ceremonies and wellness vacations, but others choose to continue to live life as they always have. It's incredible to see how settlements this small can have a history traced back for hundreds of years, and that the people within live on much like their ancestors. Despite their decline over the centuries, it's clear that the Rundling villages of Wendland will continue to thrive for generations to come.